Next talk from Professor Gabriele Balbi. We are happy to introduce Professor Galbi, coming from the Università della Svizzera Italiana.
Nice.
His main research area is media and communication history, with a focus on the history of telecommunications, the history of digital media, conceptual history of the media. In the academic committee, is currently chair of the ICA Communication History Division, a member of the steering committee of the Media History.ch Association, and member of the section committee of the Film, Media and Visual Studies section at the Academia Europa. Welcome, Professor Balbi.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation, first of all. It was very nice to be. It's my first time at the Enter Museum, first time at the Vintage Computer Festival, so thank you so much for the invitation. It's nice that we had the talk before and this talk that they speak beautifully together. So probably you save me a lot of time, and also to the audience, maybe they don't have to listen to me so long. What I'm going to present today is new results that we had from a research project that we'll talk about in a minute on the history of the web, because we were one of the first researchers to dig into the CERN archives. So the CERN archives were open because their 30 years rule is about to be expired. And so I will try to tell you at least 4 different and new stories about the web that we were able to discover. First thing, sometimes you will find, this kind of QR codes. Those are publications that we did in the meanwhile. So if you're curious about something and they're saying, you can have a look. First thing, what is the history of the web? How we can do it? And at least in one of the papers that we wrote, we said that there are 3 different ways to do it, to web and history. There could be something called the history web, as you can see up there. So the web is used by historians as a day-to-day platform and something they work on. Welcome. So, for example, historians like a lot of digital sources. They can access sources without traveling into the archives, for example. That's a way to use, the web for historians and historical perspective. Second point, we can also do history of websites, history of past websites. For example, you can also do it in the CERN archives. We found several printed websites. By the way, the CERN archive is all on paper, the World Wide Web collection at CERN. So it's very interesting how we study the web just on paper, including some websites of the past that were printed and are there. It's a way to save past websites, right? We didn't do it, basically, but if you want to do it, go into the CERN archives because it's full of printed websites. We did something, for point here, called more history of the web. So a kind of history of the web, but without considering websites. This is quite normal in media history. For example, there are several colleagues that are studying newspapers from a political perspective, not studying, the articles, or people studying photography without looking at the pictures, but they study photography per se, the technological dimension, the political dimension, economical of photography, or even broadcasting without having a look at TV programs. You could do broadcasting as a social phenomenon, as a public service, whatever you want from a political perspective. So we focus on politics, institutions, business, and also technologies. I know that technologies are maybe more interesting for you, so I prepared something more related to technologies today. How was the history of the web being told so far? My answer, simple answer, is it was told by the people that made it. So we had 2 main books that were published the same year, 1999, by Robert Caillot, James Gillis, one of the founding fathers of the web, and the second one, maybe most known, Tim Berners-Lee, wrote this book, Waving the Web. Very recently, I think it was September, if I'm not wrong, Tim Berners-Lee published another book where he claimed that the web is totally wrong. So what he had in mind is not what at the end was realized because of big brothers, because of big companies that created walled gardens in the web. And so he claimed that we need to make a web for everything and everyone, for everyone again. So going back to his original idea. And in this book, as you can see from the subtitle, it is also an unfinished story on the World Wide Web. So he, as makers, as founder, remade the history of the web. There are several media that they really like stories, they really like mythologies of genius inventors, and very often they tell the same story. So these inventors that had an inspiration, that create something great, and I would try to be skeptical about it, because those stories of genius inventors, call it Steve Jobs or call it other big moguls, are always the same. They created something, they didn't like to go to school, for example, they quit school and they changed everything about their life. So be skeptical, according to me, about this narration, which is always the same, including Sam Altman, the genius of AI today. There is limited historical research, probably because of a lack of sources. And this is the project I was talking about. That's the three of us working on the project. This is Jens Vigens, one of the CERN archivists at that time. As you can see, it was COVID time. And we are staging in front of a plaque at CERN, one of the corridors of CERN. If you ever been there, you know that you can lose yourself very easily. In one of these offices, apparently one of the offices of Tim Berners-Lee, there is this flag where the web was born. There are 5 flags over exactly like the same, and nobody knows exactly where the offices were. So again, it's a kind of reinvention of a tradition. Anyway, the Swiss National Science Foundation was so kind to finance us for 4 years and a half, and we dig into these archives. So as I said at the beginning, my finding, first thing, I would like to tell you something more about the archive per se, because when you go into an archive, it's important to understand the structure, who created it, etc. So something more about it. Second point, which were the competitors? We also discussed before about why a technology wins or loses. So let's see the panorama at that time and why the web, at the end of the day, won against the competitors. Third point, why the web is called the web. So we discovered several sources on how it was called and which were the alternatives, several alternatives over time, and why they decided to pick up World Wide Web. Final point, the confusion. The web was often confused with the internet, and this was, for Robert Caillot and people at CERN, something very bad, because they didn't recognize their work, and the internet, as we heard before, was invented much before than the web, and it was more connected to the US. So another confusion is this technology from US or from Europe? And we will see something more about it. The third confusion is about mosaic. So people believed that the web was mosaic per se, instead of a browser. We will go back on that later. The collection. The collection is not the result of an institutional decision. We have an archive made at CERN, but it was made just randomly, basically by Robert Caillot. We do have found also several documents from Tim Berners-Lee. He did not participate in the creation of this collection. There are several documents of Tim Berners-Lee in the United States, for example, at the MIT, and they are not preserved there. Other documents are preserved at the British Library. So it's a kind of, part of the story of the web is at CERN. And there are some excluded cases. What is interesting here is a repository for analysis of cases that are excluded or marginal within the official story, so made of other people that are not always known by them. We wrote a paper on this topic. The structure, those are the 2 PhDs that work with me. As you can see, they are surrounded by boxes of paper. As I told you before, it's all on paper, so it was even physically effort for all of us. As you can see here, this is the collection and the structure. The majority of the folders were done by Robert Caillot, and especially they were used for the book that he published in 1999. There are also recordings of interviews on tape, of course, at that time. And then another part was Dan Noises, then Ben Siegel, and then James Gillis for the book itself. So James Gillis was the other guy writing the book with Robert Caillot. Let me give some examples of the sources that are preserved there. Press cutting, for sure. Printed emails. So again, something that we do not print anymore, or at least they're not so printed. It's printed there because people tended, to preserve something. Promotional materials. I don't know if you've ever seen the logo of the web. There are several versions. This is the blue one, but the most famous one is in green, basically. They tried to create logos to promote the idea of the web, but at the end of the day, it didn't work so well. As you can see, the word CERN is underlined, but also the global hypertext. What is a web? It's a global hypertext. That was one of the main points for them. There are conference proceedings, so people going around, especially Robert Caillou, but also others, promoting the web everywhere, obsessively. From the 1992 to 1996, they travel a lot to promote it. And so you can have a look even of the tickets. Robert Caillou preserved everything, including the tickets of the restaurants or hotels where he traveled, so you can literally follow him over time. There are some sources, what we call the sources of inspiration. So every time there is a kind of invention, it's relevant to see how people that created a new technology were inspired. And for example, the whole Internet Users Catalog is there, and other sources, including the website, newspapers or magazines or whatever. So what people invent in the web ran at that time. You could reconstruct a little bit there. Also coexisting projects, for example, Alexandria project, so the idea of a European web after the web was emigrated into the United States. For example, the project was called Alexandria, again, a big name, like the Library of Alexandria, but it didn't work at the end. I will show you something later. So I will show more sources, just to have a brief overview of what you can find there, including printed websites, as I mentioned at the beginning. Briefly, which were the competitors? The second point that I mentioned to you. This is a draw that was sent to us by Robert Caillou himself, and it's non-published, and it's a way in which he explained the web. It's something that you have to read it historically. So from the past year to the future there. Future, we're talking about 1993, more or less, here in the middle. So according to Robert Caillou, the web made converge several other previous technologies, including, as you can see, hypertext, Gopher, of course, the PC that we heard before, of course, network and networking, and we heard before about networking. And then the web was a way to make all those stuff converge, and then the web created other new technologies. You can find it on your right. That's to be read in historical perspective. Some of the ways through which Robert tried to explain his stuff are not immediately graspable. He was a computer scientist, so maybe translating, something into normal language was not easy, but it's important to understand how he tried to do it. There were several competitors at that time. I tried to focus especially on information retrieval systems on the top, and then hypertext systems, full of hypertext systems at the time. The web was not the only one at all. There are some examples here, Hatch and Prospero, Alex, Waze, and especially Gopher. Gopher was considered the main information retrieval system at that time, with a hierarchical structure of menus, point to other menus. You could find documents. You could even find sound and images. And there was a keyword search. So it was a system quite similar to the World Wide Web, or how the World Wide Web was conceived. And if you have a look at this map, that it's one of the sources that we found there, it's quite interesting how you could see different uses of different alternative systems, for example, in the United States. They were used all together. But one quotation here of Robert, 2012, it's quite interesting, of the fact that as assigned a special issue of electronic networking of access of information on the internet had only 6 articles. Of this, one was by us on the World Wide Web, and the 3 others are respectively Prospero, Archie, and Wise, no one of which are commercial, and 2 of which are subsumed in the web. One of the idea of the web is to include all these alternative technologies and make it more powerful. Why the web won at a certain point, 1993, 1994, 1995, is not easy to establish. Probably one of the main reasons, it's simple, it was free. For example, you have to pay Gopher, which is a huge difference, and one of the ways through which the technology was spread. Open access, we could use that word today. It was not used in 1993, but We could say something like that. In terms of hybrid systems, again, all the reference to the previous presentation, so I will go not so much in depth, but we have found an interesting source, which were the advertisements of alternative systems compared to the web. And so one of the PhDs made a paper trying to understand how these ads were used by the people there, why they decided to preserve advertisements. Because they want to advertise it as well. And so they tried to take inspiration from the previous advertisements and to, make a consistent difference, which is the point of difference marketers would say of the web compared to the previous technologies. So again, one point here to be taken according to us is it could have been different. The web was one of the information retrieval system, one of the hybrid system, and at the end it was able to win. Every time the history is told by winners, but there is also history that should be told by losers. This is something that we believe is important as historians. How the web was called, sorry, it's not so big, but let's have a look at the beginning. March 1989 was mentioned before, the first proposal written by Tim Berners-Lee. And then there were several proposals between March 1989 and October 1990. Actually, 3 proposals that we found in the archives with actually 3 different names. In the first proposal, the proposal was called, it's ironic, X. So they didn't know what to call it, basically. It was not Elon Musk or anyone that, forced to call it that way. The second one was called Mesh. If you look at the center here, the second proposal is Mesh, a proposal Mesh. Then the third one, late 1990, it was called, it's on the top, World Wide Web, a single word, without space in between. Okay, going back there. So, 3 proposals, 3 different names. In between, there were several informal brainstorming. And we found all the sources and we interviewed the people that participated in these brainstormings. By the way, one brainstorming was, they were very clear. Behind the tree in the cafeteria of CERN, it was very hot. They drank a pint of Carlsberg. So they even remembered the type of beer that they were having at that time. With different possibilities. Loki, it was the god of misinformation in Sweden. So they decided to get rid of it. Disinformation in the system of information. Tim Berners-Lee proposed it. It was an acronym, of course, not his name, according to him. They decided to get rid of it. Moi, which is even more egotic in a way, and it was another acronym. And then they decided to go with the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web was the final name they wanted to have as a final name. The answer is simply no. And now I want to show you some point here. The World Wide Web was considered since the beginning a temporary name. And in several documents that we found, it was pretty clear the fact that as soon as they find a new and a better name, they would replace. So why don't we temporarily call it the World Wide Web? It just says what it is, with even drawings that we found. So the metaphors of spiders, it's often there. Those are all drawings that you can find in the CERN archives. We always knew worldwide usage was the ultimate goal. That's why we call it the worldwide back in 1990, according to Robert Caillot. But it was long, very difficult to translate, very difficult to pronounce. And it was very clear to the people that were there. Friends at CERN say it would never take off, especially with a non-syllable acronym. Sounds longer than a full name. So too long to be pronounced. I still have trouble imagining how the French would pronounce it. So here, the French that they don't like to pronounce, for example, British or American names, how would you do it with a name which is not French, for example? In executive IT meetings, discussing resources was painful with such a long name. We call it Team Project. So it was too long to be pronounced in those meetings. Some people didn't care. The ECP department secretary told me her boss, Mika, referred to as qualcosa. That's an Italian thing because Pier Giorgio Innocenti was an Italian and was the chief of Tim Berners-Lee. It could be translated as that thing. So they referred to it as that thing. So it was easier probably to be referred at it. So I wanted to provide some examples of the fact that over the time, now I go back to the timeline, over the time there were, several doubts about how to call these new technologies. There were several variants that we found it all together with an hyphen, two hyphens, or without hyphens. It was, in all the documents that we found, it was alternatively used. So in order to say that it was not clear how to read it. Several abbreviations. This is very famous, of course, but also W3 is famous, but also the web is famous. It's always the same technology, but called in very different ways. What is interesting here that from 1994 onwards, there was this confusion, and I will go back on this confusion on the next point, so I'm not spoiling myself now. Another interesting part is the trademark application. It's not well known, also because we are the first one digging into the archives, and so we found it. CERN, in 1995, decided to trademark the World Wide Web, trademark the WWW. And so it was done in the United States, February 1996, but the federal office deputy to trademark rejected the application. And they say it's a common name. So we cannot trademark something that is public and now is taken for granted. Everybody knows it. So they decided to trademark something too late at CERN, which is an interesting story. So they could not trademark. It was put for free in the public domain, and probably this is one of the reasons of a success.
Please. They tried to trademark World Wide Web or only web?
The different names altogether. And they were all considered too common word, common use. Yeah. Okay. Just to let you know that something that we take for granted as a World Wide Web or whatever, for people that invented, it was not clear at all that it could have been called that way, which is ironic. It's not the first time in media history where the inventors are not sure about the names of its inventions. Okay, now I go to the last point. I told you it was briefer than 1 hour. The confusions. We found several sources about the confusions, as I mentioned at the beginning, especially 3 main confusions. Web as the internet, first point. Web as something created in the US, which was very bad for a European center like CERN. And third point, web as a mosaic browser. This is a drawing used by Robert Caillot when he went around to promote the web. And as you can see here, he tried to make a comparison, internet as a railway or the road, semaphores are the protocols that were explained today, including TCP/IP, and the track, which is the World Wide Web. So it's just one of the services in the road. To us, could be very simple to understand, but people didn't get it completely. And especially journalists made several mistakes, and they continuously created confusions between the web and the internet. And Robert Caillot did something very strong. We found his letters. He wrote to everyone making mistakes. Unbelievable, right? So, for example, first thing, we wrote to the Italian Public Service, right, claiming that you failed to mention that the World Wide Web was invented in Europe at CERN. So, writing directly to the journalists that made something wrong in TV broadcasting in this way. Ray did not attract the public attention to the origins of the World Wide Web. As you can see, at that time, Robert Caillot wrote word, line, web. So it was different that it's spelled later. The European participation in the future of the information society is strong and deserves fair mention. Second point, there was a famous World Wide Web cafe at the G7 in 1995. You can see here some images. This is Robert Caillot, for who doesn't know him. And during the G7, there was a kind of showcase of the World Wide Web. And Robert Caillot explained all those kind of stuff. And you can see here also one of the screenings at that time, taking a picture. But there was a mistake also there. We can read how Robert Caillot complained against it. We found regrettable that we were not allowed to make the European origins of the web known to the public attending the World Wide Web Café. There was American, I'm reading the red, American showcase in which Europe was notably left invisible. So again, you see, a complaint against something. Also complaint against the French magazine, Géopolitique. Le web est mis au service au CERN. Le web est une invention et un développement européen. So again, this European origins that was failed to be described. Last point, so last confusion. So first one, the web is the internet, so he created drawings in order to, make it more clear. Second point, the web is a European invention, so let's replicate it to the journalist making mistake. Third point, the web has mosaic. And even Robert Caillot again, this is one of the papers where we have all the quotations. Mosaic is fast becoming synonymous with the World Wide Web, although it's only a client. People are beginning to confuse mosaic and W3. So again, two different, way of calling it in one single sentence. In addition, CSA just soak up what we put in the public domain. They have put the access authorization code into their library after we release it. We do not have enough resources here to do the inverse. So again, Robert Caillot started to realize that people don't call it, I surf the web, but I go on mosaic, which is something different, and he complained about it. I go quickly to the conclusion, and then, if you want, we can discuss a little bit more in general about this story. The conclusion is the fact that, thanks to an archive, of course, you have new sources, new stories that can emerge. So, in a way, every time an archive is open, from an historical perspective, I'm an historian, new stories are available to the public and to researchers. And one of our goals is to have these stories publicly available. A second point, which I think is super interesting when we study technologies, is the uncertainty. Very often new technologies bring with them uncertainties. In this case, we have seen names, for example, or confusions, or others that I haven't discussed so far because I wanted to keep it short, but there are several, uncertainties the new technologies bring uncertainties because they are new, basically. And then people later decide what to do with the technology, because it's often the people and users deciding what the technology could be in the future. Third point, new technologies are required to be promoted, required to be advertised, required to be marketed. And a PhD student of mine decided to have a paper on it, combining the literature of marketing with the literature on history of technology and finding some connections between the two. Technologies need to have marketers behind it. Robert Caillot was a marketer, not of course, he was a physicist, a computer scientist as well. But he acted as someone promoting the web. As you have seen, I provide you some examples, and there are several other examples of this marketing activity of Robert Caillot. I mentioned it before, last point, it could have been different. Every time you approach a story, with new sources, every time you see something new emerging from what is taken for granted story, you realize that it could have been different. Other technologies could have been, could have replaced the web, or the web could have died at a certain point. Probably the migration to the United States at the MIT 1994 was key in order to preserve this technology and to launch this technology. So, to me, I like to consider failures and, as we can see here, successes on the same level. And I think that historians should do it. That's all. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Professor Balbi. Please.